Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Sanjay Parashar. So today we'll talk about chunked read operation of file and FTP adapter. This operation is not that commonly used but could be very handy for a few business scenarios like processing large files in small logical chunk of data. For example, sometimes in your project there are specific memory constraints due to which your BPEL process modeler can only handle a limited size of data from a large file. In such scenario, chunked read operation can come to your rescue by reading large files in small logical chunks one at a time within a loop. And this is just one of the scenarios where chunked read operation can come in handy. It's not a straightforward file operation like read, write, list or sync read. To understand and execute chunked read operation, you need certain knowledge of loops, BPEL properties, etc. However, in this video, I will do the demo for you guys and explain all this in detail with a very easy example. So on your screen right now, you can see the important properties that we will be using in order to execute today's demo. However, there are more properties than this. There are properties for error handling in chunked read, like is message rejected, rejection reason, no data found, etc. that can help you with error handling of chunked read operation. But today we will read chunks of a file using while loop and the properties that you can see on your screen right now. So let's start. So I have this SOA application file adapter app already there. So let's create a project inside this. I'm going to name this as chunked read demo. And to keep things simple, I'm going to expose this as a SOAP adapter or a SOAP service where we are just probably we'll get a file name and we'll read that file in chunks and then we'll return success. So let's create a BPEL process. Synchronous process, and I'll leave everything as it is. So now this is exposed as SOAP. We have a receive input and an output. In receive input, we will try to get the file name that we would want to pass along and that we would want to read. So let me create a variable also for the file name. I'll keep that is of string type. Alright, so now our basic structure is ready. Now we will work on our file adapter and configure the chunked read operation. So one thing we need to know that chunked read operation is almost like a sync read operation. So it's not a polling operation. So it will always come under this reference side. So let's get the file adapter. This is the operation, chunked read operation. So I have a file that I'll show you once we're done with the development. So I downloaded that file from Google. It has some dummy data. So it has 10 rows. So let's just assume we live in an era where 10 rows is a large file and we want to read 2 rows at a time, right? However, in your real-time projects, the file will have like 1,000,000 records and you would want to read, let's say 1,000 records at a time or 10,000 records at a time, depending on how your server is configured and what are the memory constraints that you have in your project. But for our POC purpose, we have a file with 10 records and our system is not capable of reading the whole file in one go. So we want to read 2 records or 2 rows from that file at one time. So chunk size is 2. We'll go ahead and create next. Now the file that I have is in my C drive. So let me open that. So this is a file directory that I have. So I'll copy this, and this test file.csv. This is the test file.csv that you can see on your screen right now. So it has some dummy data that I downloaded from Google. I added a column in the end that has row number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that we would know that first we will read row number 1 and 2, then 3 and 4, and so on. So let me give the location here, because now we have decided that we would want to send the file name dynamically. So it really doesn't matter what file name that you would want to give here, but if you have like a static name of a file which you would know that at this location that file name will always be there, you can give that name. But as of now, you can give anything you want. It doesn't matter, because it will be overridden by the name that we will pass dynamically. So click on next. Here we'll do the same thing as we do for any other read operation, whether it is sync read or read. We'll create a native schema. I have shown that already in the previous videos where I explained file trigger, sync read and all. So rather than explaining it here, we'll just create the native schema. So we can see the data here. So our schema will be created as root element has data, and data has whatever that file contains. As it's a dummy file, I will not change the column names. I'll let them be C1, C2, C3. However, in your project, there are very good chances that you might have to change this here. But just to keep the video short, I'm going to click on next. So this is a native schema got created. And here you can test it, how your XML payload will look like once you read the data. So this column number 18 is what we will need to keep an eye on, because this represents the row number. So let's click on OK, next, and finish. Click on next, finish, and I'll just wire our BPEL and our file adapter. So as of now, there is nothing different that we have done from a sync read operation. It's almost identical, except that we chose chunked read in operation and we gave like chunk size of 2. So even if you see the JCF file, the only difference that you will see is the chunk size is 2 and the operation is chunk read. Everything else is absolutely identical to sync read. So now, as I explained in the beginning, we'll have to sort of play with the BPEL properties in order to work our way around with the chunk read operation. So first of all, let's invoke it. Let's invoke our adapter. Let's create the input and output variable. So output variable will essentially hold the chunk data that it will fetch from the file. Apply. OK. Now in the properties, to send the file name, we always have certain properties for all adapters. For example, here we have file name, size, directory. So if we would want to pass even the directory dynamically rather than the one that we have already given in JC adapter, we can pass it here. But so for our convenience, we just kept file name as dynamic. So we say that we'll pass the file name dynamically, and then we want the variable file name to be added to this property file name. We'll click on OK, apply. Okay. So as of now, we will receive the file name in our input variable. Input. We want to map this to the file name before invoking it, because in the property we have given the file name variable rather than the input variable. So let's just do that. So input variable mapped to the file name. Now let's go to the source to understand what has happened. It's kind of important for you guys to understand why we are doing this. So for example, now you can see here we have BPEL X 2 properties. So that means something that we are sending to adapter. What we are sending? We are sending the file name using a variable. So now in chunk read operation, there are certain properties which we can get from the file adapter. Those are the properties that we will be using in order to accomplish what we would want to accomplish. Those properties are like line number, column number, or is this end of file. And those are the properties that we must use in order to read the file in chunks. So let's just do that now. And those are the properties are not available on that invoke property UI. So you'll have to manually do that. So let's just do that. So to will become from like this. It's very simple. And now the property names that we absolutely need are is EOF, and let's say I will create a variable also with name out where is EOF. So we will create this variable, and the reason why I have set out here just to distinguish between input variables that we are sending to the adapter and the output variables that we're getting from the adapter. So I'm going to copy this and paste here, and then I'll change these things. So we have line number, and let's say I'll have to create a variable for line number also, and then we have column number, and we will create a variable for column number as well. So everything that we are doing is in the code, not on the graphics or the UI thing, and we have to do it in the code itself. So it's very important for you to understand. So when we invoke file adapter, we are giving the file name. We also need to give that, you know what, start with the line number 1, read, and the column number 1, and read first 2 lines. So for that, we'll have to give these properties, and we'll have to send those also to the variable. And now, as I said, there will be 2 properties. So now you guys must be understanding why I said that it's not a straightforward like read and write operation. It's a little bit tricky, but once you do it, you'll know that it totally makes sense. So now from this properties perspective, we are sending 3 properties. File name, we'll send line number as 1, column number as 1, and then we'll get whether this is end of the file or not, on what is the line number now and what is the column number now. Column number, because we have a CSV file, it will always remain 1, but it's kind of important for the process to understand, to read the first rows, and then it will read the third and fourth row. So now in here we have added like these 5 variables which we have not yet created. So what we're gonna do is you can simply create the variables also from here. So I'm creating 5 variables directly in the code, and I want all of them to be string variables, so that's fine. Alright, so that's the first important part that we just did, adding these to and from properties and creating the variables that we need. Now all we need to do is maneuver and sort of manage these variables within a while loop in order to read 2 chunks at a time within a loop. So let's try and do that. So now here we will initialize the in variables, right? So what we'll do is, so we'll say in line number. So let's start with first line. That's exactly what we are saying when we are assigning it as 1. And here column number 1. And this variable, end of file variable, let's assign it as false initially to start the loop. If we will use repeat until and not the while loop, then we don't need it, because while loop first will check if the condition is true or not. Then it will move forward and do the first looping, and repeat until first do the loop and then checks the condition. So because we have decided to use while loop, that's the reason why we need to assign it as false. So now let's drag and drop the while loop. So here what we are saying is, if end of file is false, then get into loop and keep repeating this loop till this variable becomes true, essentially, or not false. So we'll put a invoke inside this, and now let's use assign activity to update the parameters, because in order to break the loop we need to assign certain variables. So assign output parameters. So here what we're trying to do is, if our file only has 2 records, after the loop it will return true, and we would want to break the loop. So at that time we would want whatever the output EOF is coming, we want to assign it to EOF, so that in the next loop it will become true if we only have 2 records. If we have, as now we have 10 records, so after 5 loops the adapter will return EOF parameter as true, and we want to break the loop. And here we would want to assign this line number output to input. Reason, after first loop output line number will be 3, and we would want to assign it 3 so that in the next loop we read third and fourth row. Similarly, in the next loop, we would want to read fifth and sixth row. Similarly, this output where column assigned to input where column. And if we have done everything correctly, it should work now. And in the output, let's just say success. So as I said, we're gonna just hard code this to success, because the real test will be when we'll check the flow, it should be able to read 2 rows at a time within a while loop, and after reading 10 rows it should come out of the while loop. So let me just save this, let's deploy this and see if we have an error-free code or not. Alright, excellent. So we somehow managed to do develop an error-free code after doing all those changes within the code itself and not touching the UI part. And it is deployed. Now it's time to test it. So this is the service, and as now we know to test it, we'll click on test and we'll send the file name that we want to read. So testfile.csv is our file. That's the file. Let's test the web service. And here it says success because we hard coded it. The real check or the testing will be within the flow. So by the look of it, I think it worked. As you can see, the file adapter was invoked 5 times. So 10 rows, 2 rows in one chunk, and equals to 5 calls. Let's click on this BPEL so that you would understand what happened internally when we assign those to and from BPEL properties in our invoke. So this is the first loop. So in first loop, we gave the file name, right? And then column number 1 and line number 1, we hard coded it to initialize it. EOF false, we hard coded it, right? And then these are the output variables. So when you see receive, so these 3 are the output variables, right? The call line number returns as third. That says that now we are on third line. We have not read it. We have read only the first 2 lines, and these things we set those as hard coded those values. So if we see what we read row number 1 and then row number 2. And then in code, what we did is we assigned this value with this value. So what we did is we assigned input line number as 3 this time, and column number, as I said in this video, that it remains 1 for now because we are using a CSV file. This will remain false till 4th loop, but in 5th loop, because there is no new row, in my experience, this line number will be 11, telling that now I am on line number 11, but is EOF will be true because it's end of file. There are no records. That's how CSV works. And because it will become true, that means we'll come out of loop. So that's what will happen, and that's how the whole chunk read operation works. So now let's check how it worked. So this is first loop, this is second loop. So sending is 3, receiving is 5, as we said. We read 4 rows. This is loop number 3, this is 4, and this is the loop number 5. So in loop number 5, as you can see, line number is 11. That means it says that now I'm on line number 11, but here it says this is end of the file, so there is no line number 11. Because of this, it will come out of while loop, and this is the 10th row that we have read. Once we come out of the loop, we simply say success, and that's how the chunked read operation works. Now we can do anything that we want with chunked read, right? We can write these files, two files to two rows to a different directory. If we want to copy a large file from one location to another after reading and modifying the data, it's definitely easier to read certain records at one point in time, write those records, and then in the another loop again read next records, and then append those records to that file. That's how we can move, cut, paste, copy, paste large files from one place to another. Similarly, if you get into a situation where you want to read the data from 5th row, right? You don't want to read the first 4 rows. At that time also this chunked read operation could come in handy, and there are many different scenarios where this operation would come in handy. So this was a bit more complex than what we have learned so far with Integration Guru channel, but I think you guys are ready now to get into that complex stuff. So do practice. It's way easier than it seems. That's all from my end today. Thank you so much for your time, guys. Have a nice rest of the day. Take care. Bye-bye.